September 1st, 1967. Eichach Women's Prison, Bavaria, West Germany. The morning guards make their routine rounds through the cell block. When they reach cell number 7, they stop. Through the small observation window, they can see a body hanging from a bedsheet tied to the window bars. The woman is 60 years old, 3 weeks away from her 61st birthday. Her name is Ilse Koch, and for 22 years, she's been the most hated woman in Germany, perhaps the most hated woman in the world. The witch of Buchenwald, the bitch of Buchenwald, the woman accused of making lampshades from human skin. Now she's dead by her own hand, and she's left behind a suicide note that reads simply, "Death is a release for me. I cannot do otherwise. There is no other way." But here's what will shock you. This woman who became the universal symbol of Nazi barbarity, whose trial was one of the most sensational in history, whose crimes made hardened soldiers vomit, she always claimed she was innocent, always insisted she was just a housewife and mother who knew nothing about the horrors happening around her. So why did she finally give up? What broke the woman who'd survived 2 trials, 22 years of imprisonment, and became convinced that camp survivors were sneaking into her cell to kill her? The answer will reveal something disturbing about guilt, delusion, and what happens when someone spends decades being called a monster. Before we dive into this psychological nightmare, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell. We uncover the darkest truths that history tried to bury. Trust me, what's coming next will change how you see evil, justice, and the human capacity for self-deception forever. September 22nd, 1906. A baby girl is born in Dresden, Germany. Her parents, Max and Anna Kohler, name her Margarete Ilse. They're Protestant, lower middle class, ordinary in every way. Ilse has 2 brothers. She grows up in a household without wealth or privilege. Just another German family trying to get by in the early 20th century. She attends elementary school for the required 8 years. Nothing remarkable. Average student, no particular talents, no signs of the monster the world would later see. After school, she attends trade school where she learns secretarial skills. Then she finds work as a secretary, bouncing between local firms in Dresden. Bookstores, offices, nothing permanent. Around 1932, she gets a job at a factory that produces Sturm cigarettes specifically for the Nazi Party. This is years before Hitler seizes power, when the Nazi movement is still scraping for money through fundraising schemes. And it's at this cigarette factory that Ilse's life changes forever. Because that's where she meets the man who'll make her infamous, Karl Otto Koch. He's an SS officer, 11 years older than Ilse, already rising through the ranks of Heinrich Himmler's elite Nazi organization. He's handsome in his black SS uniform. He has authority, and he notices the red-haired secretary with the sharp tongue. They begin a relationship. In May 1936, Karl is appointed commandant of Sachsenhausen concentration camp near Berlin, and Ilse follows him there. The SS has rules about marriage. Officers must apply for permission, must prove their Aryan ancestry, must demonstrate they're fit for marriage according to racial criteria. Karl and Ilse do exactly that. They provide documentation proving they're racially pure Germans. The SS Office of Racial and Settlement Affairs approves their union. And in May 1937, Karl Otto Koch and Ilse Kohler are married in a midnight ceremony in an oak grove lit by torches, a quasi-pagan SS ritual that replaces traditional Christian vows with devotion to Hitler and the Reich. Ilse is now Ilse Koch, and her new husband has just received an assignment that will make his name synonymous with horror. He's been ordered to establish and command a new concentration camp called Buchenwald. July 1937. The Buchenwald concentration camp begins operations on Ettersberg Mountain, just outside the historic town of Weimar. Weimar, home of Goethe and Schiller, Germany's greatest poets and thinkers, the birthplace of German culture. And now, less than 5 miles away, the SS is building a factory for human suffering. Karl Otto Koch is the commandant, and Ilse Koch moves into the 3-story villa built specifically for the camp commander and his family. She's 30 years old. She has no official title in the Nazi system. She's not an SS guard. She's not a camp administrator. Officially, she's just the commandant's wife, a housewife. That's what she'll claim for the rest of her life. But witnesses will tell a very different story. Picture this. It's 1938. Buchenwald is operating at full capacity. Political prisoners, Jews, Jehovah's Witnesses, Roma, homosexuals, anyone the Nazis consider undesirable. 20,000 men are crammed into barracks designed for far fewer. They're starving. They're dying from disease. They're being worked to death. And every day, riding through the camp on her horse is Ilse Koch. She's dressed provocatively, witnesses will later testify. Short skirts, tight clothing, deliberately chosen to taunt the prisoners. She carries a riding crop, a leather whip she uses freely. When prisoners look at her, they're beaten. When they don't look fast enough to get out of her way, they're beaten. When she's simply in a bad mood, they're beaten. The prisoners start calling her Die Kommanduse, the female commandant, because despite having no official authority, Ilse Koch wields tremendous power at Buchenwald. She orders prisoners to work as her personal servants in the villa. She has them build an indoor riding arena costing over 250,000 Reichsmarks, constructed by slave labor. At least 30 prisoners die during its construction, either in accidents or by suicide, throwing themselves off scaffolding rather than continue working. And when the arena is complete, Ilse rides there several times a week while an SS band plays music for her entertainment. But wait until you hear what else happens at Buchenwald, because the allegations that will define Ilse Koch's reputation, the accusations that will make her trial international news, they're about to emerge. And they're so disturbing that even today, historians debate whether they're true. Sometime around 1939 or 1940, camp prisoners begin noticing something strange. Men with distinctive tattoos, elaborate designs covering their chests or backs, are being selected and sent to the camp pathology department. They never return. Then prisoners who work in the pathology department start seeing something horrific. Pieces of tattooed human skin being treated, preserved, prepared. The camp doctor is Dr. Erich Wagner, an SS physician writing a dissertation on the supposed link between criminality and tattooing. He's collecting samples for his research. But witnesses will later claim that some of this human skin doesn't stay in the pathology department. Some of it gets turned into items. Lampshades, book covers, gloves, photo albums. And they claim these items belong to Ilse Koch. A Franciscan monk imprisoned at Buchenwald will testify at her trial that he saw Ilse write down the number of a prisoner with a distinctive tattoo of a sailing ship. That evening, the prisoner was summoned by guards and disappeared. 6 months later, the monk claims he saw prepared skin with that exact tattoo in the pathology department. Later still, he says he saw it on the cover of Ilse Koch's personal photo album. Another witness testifies about a lampshade made from human skin with tattoos visible on it, displayed in the Koch villa. These allegations explode after the war. They become the centerpiece of Ilse Koch's trial. They make her name synonymous with unimaginable depravity, human skin lampshades. It's the perfect symbol of Nazi barbarity, the ultimate proof of how completely the Nazis had stripped prisoners of their humanity. And Ilse Koch becomes the face of this horror. But here's the problem. Nobody can prove it. The lampshade disappears. The photo album can't be found. 2 American correspondents who were shown what was claimed to be a human skin photo album examine it and report that in their opinion, it's not human skin and there's no tattoo visible on it. The Franciscan monk turns out not to be a monk at all, but someone who offered his testimony for a hefty reward, and his story keeps changing. First, the tattoo was on a photo album, then it was on a lampshade. The evidence doesn't hold up, but the image does. Once the world hears about human skin lampshades, once newspapers print those allegations, the truth becomes irrelevant. Ilse Koch will forever be the woman who made lampshades from murdered prisoners, whether she actually did or not. What isn't in dispute is that Ilse Koch abused prisoners. Multiple witnesses testified to that. She beat them with her riding crop. She reported prisoners to SS guards, knowing they'd be beaten severely, sometimes fatally. She forced prisoners to perform exhausting physical labor for her entertainment. She exploited slave labor for her personal projects. She was cruel, sadistic, and enjoyed the power she had over helpless people. But did she personally select prisoners to be murdered for their tattooed skin? That's never conclusively proven. And this ambiguity, this gap between what she definitely did and what she's accused of doing, it will haunt her for the rest of her life. Meanwhile, the Koch marriage is falling apart. One of their three children, infant daughter Gudrun, dies of pneumonia in February 1941. Karl has numerous affairs with women from nearby Weimar. Ilse retaliates by having her own affairs with SS officers at the camp. The couple barely speaks. And then in 1941, something happens that changes everything. Prince Josias von Waldeck-Pyrmont, the senior SS and police leader for the region, starts hearing rumors of corruption, rumors that Commandant Karl Otto Koch is embezzling massive amounts of money from the camp, stealing valuables confiscated from Jewish prisoners, living far beyond what his salary should allow. Waldeck orders an investigation, and on December 18, 1941, Karl Koch is arrested by his own SS superiors. Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS and Karl's friend, hears about the arrest and orders Karl released. But the damage is done. Karl is relieved of command at Buchenwald and transferred to Majdanek concentration camp in Poland. Ilse stays behind at Buchenwald with their children. But in August 1943, both Karl and Ilse are arrested again. This time the investigation is more thorough, led by SS Judge Konrad Morgan, known as the Bloodhound Judge for his relentless pursuit of corruption in the camps. Morgan discovers that Karl has embezzled over 200,000 Reichsmarks, but he also discovers something worse. Karl has murdered at least 3 prisoners, injecting them with typhus to prevent them from testifying about his corruption. Ilse is accused of embezzling over 700,000 Reichsmarks worth of goods and valuables. They're both held in Gestapo prison in Weimar awaiting trial. In 1944, the SS court renders its verdict. Karl Otto Koch is found guilty and sentenced to death. Ilse Koch is acquitted for lack of evidence. She's released. April 4, 1945. Just days before Germany's surrender, Karl Otto Koch is executed by firing squad at Buchenwald on orders of the SS. His own organization kills him for being too corrupt, too murderous, even by their standards. Ilse, now a widow, takes her 2 surviving children to Ludwigsburg near Stuttgart. She moves in with relatives. She thinks it's over. She thinks she's free. She couldn't be more wrong. April 11, 1945. The U.S. Army liberates Buchenwald. What they find makes hardened soldiers physically ill, emaciated prisoners barely alive, mountains of corpses, and in the pathology department, specimens of preserved human organs and pieces of tattooed human skin. The Americans bring in reporters, congressmen, anyone who needs to see the reality of Nazi concentration camps. They photograph everything. They document everything, and they start taking testimony from survivors. The survivors talk about Karl Otto Koch and his corruption. They talk about the sadistic guards. They talk about the medical experiments. And they talk extensively about Ilse Koch, about her cruelty, about her riding crop, about the human skin items they claim she owned. The Americans start looking for her. June 30th, 1945. Ilse Koch is walking through Ludwigsburg with her 2 children, 8-year-old Artwin and 6-year-old Gisela, when a former Buchenwald prisoner recognizes her on the street. He goes to the authorities. American military police arrest Ilse that day. She's taken into custody to await trial as a war criminal, and she's shocked, genuinely shocked. In a letter she'll write later, she says, "It would have been easy for me to obtain false papers and live somewhere with a false name. It also would have been easy for me to have disguised myself, but I had no reason whatsoever to disappear. I never even conceived of the possibility of being put to trial." This tells you everything about Ilse Koch's mindset. She genuinely believes she's done nothing wrong. She's the commandant's wife. She lived at the camp, but she had no official position. She was just a housewife raising her children. The operation of the camp didn't concern her. That's her story, and she's sticking to it. April 11th, 1947, exactly 2 years to the day after Buchenwald's liberation, the trial begins at the former Dachau concentration camp. 31 defendants are charged with the war crimes committed at Buchenwald. Prince Josias von Waldeck-Pyrmont, the highest-ranking defendant, camp doctors, SS officers, guards, and Ilse Koch, the only woman in the dock. The prosecution is led by Colonel William Denson. The charges are filed under a legal theory called common design. The prosecution doesn't have to prove that each defendant committed specific acts of violence. They only have to prove that the defendants participated in and supported the murderous enterprise that was Buchenwald, that they aided and abetted a criminal organization. Ilse's defense is handled by Captain Emmanuel Lewis, an American military lawyer who happens to be Jewish. The trial lasts 4 months, and it becomes a media sensation. Reporters from every major newspaper in America fly in. Extra rows of seats have to be installed in the courtroom to accommodate the crowd. Everyone wants to see the Witch of Buchenwald. Everyone wants to hear testimony about the woman who allegedly made lampshades from human skin. Ilse is 40 years old, red-haired, and according to witnesses, shows little emotion during much of the trial. She sits there calmly as survivor after survivor takes the stand. They describe her riding through the camp in provocative clothing. They describe her beating prisoners with her riding crop. They describe her reporting prisoners for punishment, beatings that sometimes resulted in death. They describe the human skin artifacts they claim she owned. The testimony is devastating. The courtroom is packed, and everyone is watching Ilse Koch. But wait until you hear what happens during her own testimony, because what she reveals will show you the depths of her self-deception. When Ilse takes the stand, she has a surprise for the court. She announces that she's 7 months pregnant. This is shocking because she's been held in isolation with no contact with men except American interrogators. There's immediate speculation about who the father might be. Some claim it's Joseph Kirschbaum, a Jewish interrogator who was one of the few men with access to her cell. Others whisper about a fellow German prisoner she might have had contact with. The pregnancy is never explained. What is clear is that it saves her from a death sentence. American military courts don't execute pregnant women. Ilse testifies that she was just a housewife, that her primary job was raising her 3 children, that the operation of the camp didn't concern her, that she never selected prisoners for death, that she never owned items made from human skin, that witnesses are lying or mistaken. Her defense attorney, Captain Lewis, argues that even if Ilse was morally deviant, even if she lacked human feelings, those aren't war crimes under international law. Another American lawyer, Leon Polada, states for the record, "The documents reveal Frau Koch to have been a morally deviant woman lacking in human feelings. But in the United States, such personality traits are not punishable offenses, and they are certainly not war crimes under the rules of international law." The prosecution counters that Ilse Koch participated in the common design, that she knew Buchenwald was a murder factory, and she actively supported its operation, that she beat prisoners, that she reported them knowing they'd be killed, that she benefited from slave labor, that she was complicit in every death that occurred while she lived in luxury at the camp. On August 14, 1947, the verdicts are read. Many defendants are sentenced to death by hanging. Ilse Koch is sentenced to life imprisonment. She gives birth to her son, Uwe Kohler, on October 29, 1947, at Landsberg Prison. The baby is immediately taken from her and placed with Bavarian child welfare authorities. But then something unexpected happens. The sentence goes through mandatory review. 2 lawyers in the office of the Deputy Judge Advocate for War Crimes, Harold Kuhn and Richard Schneider, examine the case. They conclude, in spite of the extravagant statements made in the newspapers, the record contains little convincing evidence against the accused. The case goes to General Lucius Clay, military governor of the American Zone in Germany. And on June 8, 1948, Clay makes a decision that will spark international outrage. He reduces Ilse Koch's sentence from life imprisonment to 4 years. He states publicly, there was no convincing evidence that she had selected inmates for extermination in order to secure tattooed skins. The reaction is immediate and furious. The American public is outraged. The U.S. Senate launches an investigation. Newspapers demand answers. How can the Witch of Buchenwald be released after just 2 years? The prosecutor, William Denson, writes an op-ed protesting the decision. The outcry is so intense that German authorities decide to act. On July 11, 1949, just as Ilse is about to be released, she's rearrested by German police. She's going to face trial again, this time in a German court. January 15th, 1951. Ilse Koch stands trial before a German court in Augsburg. She's charged with incitement to murder in 135 cases, incitement to attempted murder, and incitement to grievous bodily harm. This trial focuses on crimes against German nationals at Buchenwald, which weren't covered in the 1947 American trial. Witnesses testify again. More survivors come forward. The evidence of her cruelty is overwhelming. The lampshade allegations are still discussed, though still not proven. On January 15th, 1951, she's convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment and permanent forfeiture of her civil rights. In its written judgment, the court states that Koch's crimes were particularly egregious because she consciously suppressed any feeling of compassion and pity she had as a woman, and instead gave free rein to her pursuit of power and prestige, her arrogance, and her selfishness. Ilse appeals. The Federal Court of Justice dismisses her appeal on April 22nd, 1952. She's going to spend the rest of her life in prison. She's transferred to Eichach Women's Prison in Bavaria. And there, slowly over the next 16 years, something breaks inside her. At first, she maintains her innocence. She writes letters petitioning for clemency. All are rejected by the Bavarian Ministry of Justice. She appeals to the International Human Rights Commission. Nothing. The outside world has decided Ilse Koch is guilty, Ilse Koch is a monster, Ilse Koch will die in prison. Meanwhile, her children are growing up without her. Daughter Gisela is being raised by relatives. Son Artwin, traumatized by the shame of his parents' crimes, struggles to cope with the knowledge of what his mother did, what his father was. In 1964, Artwin commits suicide. He cannot live with the burden of being the son of the beast of Buchenwald and a commandant executed for corruption and murder. Ilse learns of her son's death in prison, a psychiatrist examining her notes that she's perverted, nymphomaniacal, hysterical, and power-hungry demon, but also that she's deteriorating mentally. Then in the mid-1960s, something happens that briefly gives Ilse hope. Her son Uwe, the baby taken from her at birth, now a teenager being raised in a foster home, discovers his mother's identity. At 8 years old, he'd seen her name on his birth certificate. 11 years later, at 19, he reads a newspaper story and makes the connection. During Christmas 1966, with what he'll later describe in his age, a creepy feeling, Uwe Kohler goes to Eichach prison and meets his mother for the first time since infancy. Ilse is overjoyed. Finally, someone who doesn't hate her, someone who's willing to visit. They begin meeting regularly once a month as prison rules allow. For Ilse, Uwe represents hope. Maybe someone will fight for her release. Maybe someone still believes she's not the monster everyone says she is. Maybe there's a chance. But by 1967, that hope is fading. Ilse has been in prison for 22 years. She's 60 years old. She's never getting out. And worse, her mind is fracturing. Prison psychiatrists report that she's experiencing delusions. She's convinced that Buchenwald survivors are sneaking into the prison. She believes they're coming to her cell to abuse her, to torture her, to kill her. She can't sleep. She can't eat. The guards hear her at night, mumbling, crying out, convinced that ghosts from her past are closing in. She's trapped in a nightmare of her own making. Whether she actually made lampshades from human skin or not doesn't matter anymore. She spent years at Buchenwald. She witnessed horrors. She participated in them, even if only by reporting prisoners, by beating them, by exploiting their labor. And now, decades later, those horrors have consumed her completely. August 1967. Ilse writes letters to her son Uwe. The tone is desperate. She tells him she can't go on. She tells him there's no other way. She tells him death is the only release. Uwe visits her. He sees how deteriorated she's become. But there's nothing he can do. His mother is serving a life sentence for war crimes. There will be no pardon. There will be no release. There is no hope. September 1st, 1967. The morning is like any other at Eichach Women's Prison. Guards make their rounds. Breakfast is delivered. The routine is unchanging, has been unchanging for 16 years. When they reach cell 7, they look through the observation window, and they see Ilse Koch hanging by a bedsheet tied to the window bars. She's used her bed linens to fashion a noose. She's tied it carefully, climbed up somehow, put it around her neck, and let herself drop. The guards rush in. They cut her down. But it's too late. Ilse Koch is dead. She's 3 weeks away from her 61st birthday. She spent more than a third of her life in prison. And she died believing she was innocent, believing the world had been unfair to her, believing that camp survivors were coming to kill her. The delusion was complete until the very end. Her suicide note is brief. Death is a release for me. I cannot do otherwise. There is no other way. No admission of guilt. No apology to victims. No acknowledgement of the suffering she caused. Just a statement that she couldn't continue living. The woman who'd spent decades insisting she was just a housewife, that she knew nothing about Buchenwald's horrors, that she was a victim of false accusations. She hanged herself rather than face one more day in prison. Whether that's an admission of guilt or simply exhaustion, we'll never know. The prison authorities remove her body. There's no ceremony, no funeral. Ilse Koch is buried in an unmarked grave. Her daughter Gisela doesn't attend. She spent her whole life trying to escape her mother's shadow, trying to build a normal life despite being the daughter of the witch of Buchenwald. Uwe, the son who'd only just reconnected with his mother, is devastated. He'll spend years trying to rehabilitate her reputation, arguing that she was unfairly convicted, that the evidence against her was weak, that she was made a scapegoat. But the world doesn't want to hear it. The world has decided who Ilse Koch was, and nothing her son says will change that. So why did Ilse Koch really kill herself? The simple answer is that she'd given up. 22 years in prison, knowing she'd never be released, watching her son commit suicide from the shame of being her child, losing touch with her daughter, meeting her youngest son only to realize even he couldn't save her. The delusions, the paranoia, the constant fear that camp survivors were coming for her. It broke her. She hanged herself because she couldn't live with the reality of her situation anymore. But there's a deeper answer. Ilse Koch lived her entire adult life in a state of profound self-deception. She married an SS officer and moved with him to concentration camps. She lived in luxury while prisoners starved feet from her door. She beat them. She exploited them. She benefited from a system built on murder. And she convinced herself that she'd done nothing wrong, that she was just a wife and mother, that the horrors happening around her weren't her responsibility. This self-deception sustained her through her arrest, through 2 trials, through 2 decades in prison. But by 1967, the walls were crumbling. The delusions about camp survivors coming to kill her, they represent her subconscious finally breaking through. She knew on some level what she'd done. She knew what she'd participated in. And that knowledge, kept buried for so long, finally consumed her. The question that haunts historians is this: did Ilse Koch make lampshades from human skin? Probably not. The evidence for that specific crime never held up in court. Human skin artifacts were found at Buchenwald, but connecting them directly to Ilse was always problematic. The more likely culprit was Dr. Erich Wagner, the camp doctor who was collecting tattooed skin for his dissertation. But the lampshade allegation became so famous, so iconic, that it overwhelmed everything else. It made Ilse Koch into a symbol of Nazi depravity far beyond what she actually did. What Ilse Koch definitely did was participate in a system of murder. She lived at a concentration camp where 65,000 people died. She witnessed their suffering daily. She contributed to that suffering through her cruelty, her abuse, her exploitation of slave labor. She could have shown compassion and didn't. She could have refused to participate and didn't. She chose to be there. She chose to benefit from it. She chose to beat prisoners and report them for punishment. And for those choices, she was convicted and imprisoned for life. The tragedy of Ilse Koch is that she became more famous for crimes she probably didn't commit than for crimes she definitely did. The human skin lampshades overshadowed the documented abuse. The sensational allegations overshadowed the proven cruelty, and this created a situation where some people could argue she was wrongly convicted, that she was a victim of war crimes hysteria, that the evidence against her was weak. But that misses the point. Ilse Koch participated in Buchenwald. She supported its operation. She benefited from it. She was cruel to prisoners. Those facts are not in dispute, and there are more than enough to justify her conviction. When she hanged herself with bedsheets in 1967, she took her version of the truth to the grave. We'll never know if she truly believed she was innocent or if the delusions and paranoia in her final years represented some kind of psychological reckoning. We'll never know if she felt genuine remorse or just regret at being caught. What we do know is that she spent 22 years in prison and died believing the world had been unfair to her. And in a twisted way, maybe she was right. Not because she didn't deserve punishment, she absolutely did, but because she became a symbol, a scapegoat, the face of Nazi female cruelty, bearing the weight of public outrage that should have been spread across thousands of perpetrators.